Every person in your life was sent to show you something. Carl Jung. Carl Jung observed that the people who move us most powerfully, whether toward warmth or toward fury, are rarely reacting to something out there at all, but to something the psyche has already prepared inside, waiting for a face to wear. Jung wrote, in a short essay gathered in Collected Works Volume 10, that in each of us there is another whom we do not know, and this stranger inside speaks to us in dreams and tells us how differently he sees us from how we see ourselves. And when this happens, Jung said, we should take it seriously. Here is the premise for tonight. Quietly enormous. The people who cross our path are not simply people. They are also, whether we like it or not, screens onto which the unknown stranger inside us throws his shape, and something in us recognizes that shape before the mind can name it. That is why a stranger at a dinner party can make our blood rise in an instant. That is why a colleague we barely know can occupy an unreasonable amount of our thoughts. Something is being shown. The question is only whether we are willing to look at what is doing the showing. Before we go further, let's put this into a shape we can carry. I offer you 3 lines, present tense, and I would ask you to say them with me, not as a slogan, but as a small vow to pay attention. Here is the first. I see the people in my life as mirrors. Here is the second. I withdraw what I have thrown onto their faces. And here is the third. I make the unconscious conscious. Say it with me. I see the people in my life as mirrors. I withdraw what I have thrown onto their faces. I make the unconscious conscious. And once more, slower this time, I see the people in my life as mirrors. I withdraw what I have thrown onto their faces. I make the unconscious conscious before the keys. A small favor. If any part of this has already touched something true in you, put just a single red heart in the comments below. Nothing more is needed. It helps this teaching find the next person who needs to hear it tonight. And now, let us open the 9 keys. The first key is this. No one arrives in your life by accident. In the sense that matters here, Jung put it plainly, one meets with projections, one does not make them. And this line is worth sitting with, because it tells us something uncomfortable. We do not decide to project onto someone. We discover, upon meeting them, that we already have. The charge is already there. The reaction is already loaded. Before a single word has passed between you, imagine you walk into a room and there is a person you have never met, and within 30 seconds, something in you has already decided, this one I trust, or this one unsettles me, or this one I cannot stop watching, long before the evidence could possibly justify such a verdict. That speed is the signature of projection. Real knowledge of another human being takes years, but projection is instant. It does not wait for facts. It simply needs a hook to hang itself upon. And here is a smaller, quieter version of the same thing. Imagine you are standing in line at a coffee shop, and a stranger ahead of you laughs a little too loudly at something on their phone, and before you have even seen their face, some part of you has already filed a verdict, careless, or self-absorbed, or somehow familiar in a way you cannot place. You have no history with this person. You will likely never see them again. And yet the verdict arrived fully formed, faster than thought. This is the part Jung asked us to notice, not the stranger, but the speed, because ordinary judgment, the kind built from evidence, is slow. It gathers, it revises itself, it waits to be corrected, but this other kind of knowing arrives already finished, like a letter that was written long before the person existed, waiting only for a face to be delivered to. And the hook, Jung would say, is real. There is always something about the other person, some gesture, some quality, some resemblance, that makes them a plausible place to hang the image. The loud laugh was real. The confident stranger in the room was real. But the size of your reaction, the heat of it, the way it will not let you go, that belongs to you, not to them. That part was manufactured somewhere else, long before this meeting, and simply found its opportunity here. This is the first key, and it is a short one, but it changes how you sit in every room you enter, because it means the people who unsettle you and the people who fascinate you are not neutral data, they are messages, and the message is addressed to you. The second key is the tell, and the tell is disproportion. How do you know when you are looking at a real person, and how do you know when you are looking at your own projection, wearing their coat? Jung's answer, in practice, was simple. Measure the size of the reaction against the size of the event. If a colleague forgets to reply to your email, and you find yourself constructing an entire narrative about their contempt for you, replaying it at midnight, composing arguments you will never speak aloud, that is disproportion. The event was small, an unanswered email. The reaction was enormous, a flood. And floods do not come from puddles, they come from reservoirs. Somewhere behind that reaction is a reservoir of old material, a childhood verdict, a wound, a fear that has been waiting for an excuse to surface, and the colleague simply happened to stand near the sluice gate when it opened. This does not mean the colleague did nothing. They may in fact have been careless. But the size of your response is not about their carelessness, it is about what their carelessness touched in you. Imagine a woman who cannot tolerate being kept waiting, 5 minutes late, and something in her goes cold and furious. Out of all proportion to 5 minutes, if you asked her, she would say the other person is disrespectful. But Jung would ask her to look instead at the fury itself. Where has she felt unseen before? Where has waiting once meant something far larger than waiting? Notice too how the same measure applies in the opposite direction, not only to what enrages us, but to what enchants us. Imagine a man who meets someone at a gathering and within the hour has decided this is the most remarkable person he has ever encountered. Brilliant, magnetic, unlike anyone else in the room, and perhaps they are impressive, but ask him a year later what was actually said that evening, and he may struggle to recall a single sentence that would justify the size of the feeling. That too is disproportion. The same flood, only running toward admiration instead of anger. In both directions, the arithmetic is the same. Small occasion, oversized response, and the size is the signal. Not the story you tell about why the size is justified, because the mind is endlessly clever at justifying its own floods. It will always find a reason the other person deserved the full weight of the reaction. That is what makes disproportion so easy to miss from the inside. You rarely feel excessive in the moment. You feel absolutely right. This is the second key. Disproportion is the signal flare. It tells you that a projection, not merely a person, is now standing in the room with you. Learn to notice the flare the instant it goes up, before the story has time to harden around it, and once you can see it clearly, you can no longer mistake the mirror for the window. The third key is the phrase Jung used to describe what projection actually does to the world around us. In Ion, he wrote that projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. Read that again slowly. The replica of one's own unknown face. This means the world you see, populated by people who charm you or repel you or bore you or haunt you, is in some real measure a portrait gallery of yourself, painted without your permission, by a hand you cannot see. The unknown face is the part of you that has never been introduced to your conscious mind, the qualities you have never claimed, the reactions you have never owned. And this unknown face does not stay hidden quietly. It goes looking for a body to borrow. It finds someone whose features are close enough, and it settles there. And suddenly you are convinced that this specific person, embodies arrogance, or coldness, or brilliance, or menace, and you would swear on anything that your judgment is simply accurate perception. Let me give this some flesh. Imagine a man who joins a new company, and within the first week, he becomes quietly convinced that one particular colleague is the most brilliant person he has ever worked with. He hangs on this colleague's every word in meetings. He replays their casual remarks for days afterward. He feels, in their presence, slightly smaller than usual. Now brilliance may well be present. Plenty of people are genuinely gifted. But notice the shape of the feeling itself. It arrived before the evidence. It is heavier than the facts could account for, and it carries a strange undertone. Not simple respect, but something closer to hunger. Watching someone else hold something he wants and does not quite believe he is allowed to hold himself. That undertone is the signature of imago, the technical word Jung used for exactly this. The image the unconscious casts outward and then mistakes for a discovery made about someone else. The colleague becomes, without either of them arranging it, the screen on which this man's own unclaimed capacity is projected. The brilliance he cannot yet own in himself, he finds, gleaming, in another man's mouth. And it works the same way in the darker direction. The neighbor who strikes you as sly, the acquaintance you are certain is secretly judging you, the public figure whose very voice makes something in you clench. In each case, the mechanism is identical. Only the coloring differs. Gold instead of shadow, admiration instead of suspicion, but the same unknown face doing the casting. This is Jung's real point, and it is more modest than it first sounds. He is not claiming that the other person has no qualities of their own. The colleague may in fact be able. The neighbor may in fact be evasive. The world is not an illusion, but the intensity, the certainty, the sense that this one person matters far more than the visible facts explain. That intensity is imago, not observation, and once you have the word, you have a small tool you can carry into any room. In the heat of a reaction, admiring or hostile, you can quietly ask, "Is this imago, or is this simply the man in front of me?" And that question, asked honestly, and asked often enough to become a habit, has ended more quarrels and cured more quiet envies than any argument ever has. The fourth key comes from a story Jung told about himself, and it may be the clearest illustration he ever gave of how a person can become a mirror for an entire civilization. Not just for one troubled mind, Jung recalled meeting a Pueblo chief named Ochwe Biano at Taos in New Mexico, and in the course of their conversation, the chief said something that stopped Jung cold. He said the whites always want something. They are always uneasy and restless. We do not know what they want. We do not understand them. We think that they are mad. And Jung, listening, felt the accusation land somewhere true. He wrote that he saw, as if from outside, the eagle-headed, restless quality of the European soul reflected in the old chief's calm and untroubled face. And it is worth sitting with why this moment cut so deep. Jung had traveled to Taos as an educated European, a man of science, a man who believed, as his whole culture believed, that the white world was the arriving gift of progress to the rest of the earth. And here was an old man, with no interest in progress at all, whose stillness alone was enough to make that whole assumption tremble. Notice that the chief did not argue with Jung. He did not list grievances. He did not raise his voice. He simply remained what he was, quiet, rooted, unhurried. And it was precisely that quiet rootedness that acted as the mirror. If the chief had been agitated himself, restless in his own way, the reflection could never have formed. It takes a still surface to show a face clearly. A churning one only shows chaos. This is worth carrying into your own life, because the people who show us the most about ourselves are very often not the ones who attack us, but the ones who simply remain themselves in our presence, calmly, without apology, and in doing so make our own agitation, our own hunger, our own hidden restlessness suddenly visible to us for the first time. Imagine sitting across from someone who is entirely at ease with silence. No need to fill it, no need to perform, and noticing, with some discomfort, how badly you want to fill it yourself. That discomfort is not really about them, it is the old chief's mirror in miniature, playing out over a coffee table instead of a continent. Here is the second thing worth noticing in Jung's account. He did not defend himself. He did not tell the chief that Europe had cathedrals and universities and medicine. He let the accusation stand and sat inside the discomfort of it. And this, Jung would say later, was the harder and more valuable response, because the easy response, the automatic response, is always to argue back the moment we feel exposed, to produce reasons why the mirror is wrong, why the other person does not understand us, why their view is unfair or incomplete. But arguing back closes the mirror before it can finish its work. Jung's discipline, and it is a discipline, was to let the reflection stay open a moment longer than comfort allows, to ask, quietly, is there truth in what I am seeing here? Even if the whole of it is not fair, even if the person showing it to me is a stranger, a foreigner, someone with no formal claim to judge me at all. This is the invitation inside the fourth key. When someone, especially someone very different from you, in temperament, in culture, in pace of life, reflects something about you that stings, the temptation is always to explain it away, to find the flaw in their perspective rather than the truth in their reflection. But the greater discipline, and Jung modeled it himself, at some cost to his own pride, is to sit with the sting and ask, plainly, what am I being shown here that I could never have seen from inside my own skin? Because the view from inside a culture, or inside a personality, or inside a single accustomed way of living, is always partial. We cannot see our own restlessness while we are being restless. We need, occasionally, the still face of someone entirely outside our habits, to catch what we would otherwise never notice about ourselves at all. The fifth key is closer to home, and I want you to imagine it as your own. Imagine you work alongside someone, and there is nothing dramatic between you, no history of conflict, no old wound you can point to, and yet every time this person speaks in a meeting, something in you contracts, quietly, reliably, before you have even decided to feel anything at all. You find their confidence grating. You privately call them arrogant. You notice, if you are honest with yourself late at night, that no one else in the room seems to share your intensity of feeling about them. Other colleagues find them merely fine, a little assertive perhaps, nothing more. One or two even admire them. And this gap between what you feel and what everyone else around you feels is exactly the situation Jung asked us to examine. When a reaction to a person is not shared by the room, when it is yours alone, in that particular strength, the reaction is very often telling you less about them and more about a disowned corner of yourself. So let us slow down and walk through how such a thing forms, because it rarely arrives from nowhere perhaps. Somewhere long ago, in a house you no longer live in, you learned that taking up space was dangerous, that a raised voice at the dinner table meant trouble was coming, that it was safer, wiser even, to be quiet, to be agreeable, to make yourself small enough not to be noticed. And a child who learns this lesson well does not simply forget it once they grow older. The lesson goes underground. It becomes part of the furniture of the psyche, unseen but load-bearing. And then, one ordinary Tuesday, decades later, in a meeting room with fluorescent lighting and bad coffee, a colleague speaks without apologizing for taking the floor, states an opinion plainly, does not soften it, does not glance around the table checking whether it is acceptable to have taken up this much air, and something old in you stands straight up and says, "Unfair. That is unfair," though no one has done anything to you at all. This is the mechanism working exactly as Jung described it. A person who simply occupies a room without apology becomes, without either of you intending it, a living reminder of a permission you never gave yourself. The arrogance you see in them may be, in real proportion, the confidence you buried in yourself so long ago that you forgot you ever owned it. Notice, too, how the mind defends this arrangement. It will offer you excellent reasons, he interrupts people. She never listens, they only care about being right. And some of this may even be true in small measure. Jung never asked you to pretend the other person is flawless, but watch the energy behind the accusation. Watch how much time you spend rehearsing it, how satisfying it feels to catalog their faults to a friend over dinner. That satisfaction is a clue. Real observation is calm. It does not need an audience. It does not need repeating. But a projection wants company. It wants agreement. It wants someone else to confirm that yes, that person really is impossible. Because as long as others agree, you never have to turn the question back toward the part of you that flinched first. This is not comfortable to consider. It is far easier to simply decide the colleague is difficult and move on with your day. But Jung's method asks for one more question before you close the file, and it is worth carrying with you into every room you enter for the rest of your life. If I removed this person entirely from my life tomorrow, transferred departments, changed jobs, never saw them again, would the quality I cannot stand in them disappear from the world, or would I simply meet it again, wearing a different face, in a different office, next year? And the honest answer, nearly always, is that you would meet it again, because it was never really about them. It was about an old arrangement inside you that has not yet been renegotiated. That question, asked patiently, quietly, without drama, across the years, is how a person slowly stops being ambushed by their own reflection every time it happens to walk into the room wearing someone else's coat. The sixth key is a practice, and I want to give it to you plainly enough that you could begin it tonight. Jung did not ask his patients to simply believe in projection as an interesting theory. He asked them to go looking for it in their own daily record. The unconscious does not announce itself in grand pronouncements. It leaves traces, small and repeated, in the ordinary texture of a week, and the discipline is simply to start writing those traces down before they evaporate. So here is a small practice. Call it an irritation inventory. At the end of a day, or better, at the end of a week, sit with a notebook and write down the names of the people who provoked the strongest reactions in you. Not the mild annoyances, not the traffic or the weather, but the strong ones, the ones that lingered, that you replayed on the drive home, that you found yourself defending your position about to an imaginary jury in the shower the next morning. Imagine, for a moment, a man who works in an ordinary office, and every Tuesday in the weekly meeting, there is a colleague who speaks slowly, who repeats himself, who seems, to this man, unbearably slow to make his point, and each week the man feels a heat rise in him that is completely out of proportion to a meeting about scheduling. He says nothing, but he seethes, and by Friday he has forgotten it, and by the next Tuesday it returns exactly as strong as before. This is exactly the kind of entry the inventory is built to catch, because it is recurring, and because it is disproportionate, and because it would otherwise be dismissed as simply having a low tolerance for slow talkers. Next to each name in your own inventory, write one plain word for the quality that bothered you most: arrogant, cold, needy, controlling, careless, slow, loud, whatever the word actually is when you are honest about it. And then comes the part that most people quietly skip because it is the uncomfortable part. Ask yourself, where in my own life have I shown this same quality, even in a small way, even once, even only under pressure, even only as a child? And be patient with the search, because the answer rarely arrives on the first asking. The man irritated by his slow colleague might discover, if he sits with it long enough, that he himself was once told, as a boy, that he talked too much, that he took up too much room, and so he learned to compress himself, to speak quickly and get out of the way. And now, without knowing it, anyone who takes their time in his presence touches that old compression directly. This is not an exercise in self-punishment. Jung was firm about that point. The goal of the inventory is not to conclude that you are secretly terrible, or that every fault you notice in another is proof of some hidden guilt. The goal is only to notice that the quality exists somewhere in your own repertoire, in some quiet corner, perhaps buried, perhaps merely unused. And once you can find even a trace of it in yourself, the charge on the other person begins, slowly, to drop. Not because they have changed, not because the slow-talking colleague suddenly speaks any faster, but because the mirror has been recognized as a mirror, and a recognized mirror stops working like a trap. Do this honestly with 5 names, spread across a few weeks if you need to, and you will very likely notice a pattern, not 5 different complaints, but the same 1 or 2 qualities recurring under different faces, arrogance again, or neediness again, or carelessness again, wearing a new coat each time, but carrying the same signature underneath. And that pattern, once seen clearly on the page in your own handwriting, is a doorway. It is pointing, quite precisely, at the part of your own unknown face that has been asking, for years perhaps, to finally be introduced. The 7th key concerns what happens after you have found the trace, because finding it is only half the work. Jung called the second half withdrawal, and withdrawal is a word worth sitting with, because it is not the same as apologizing, and it is not the same as simply deciding to think kinder thoughts about someone. Withdrawal means physically, deliberately, taking back something you had thrown outward without noticing you had thrown it. Imagine the projection as a kind of loan you made without ever signing papers. You handed a piece of yourself to another person's face, and you have been living, ever since, as though that piece belonged to them. Withdrawal is the slow work of calling the loan back in, and it is almost never a single dramatic moment. Despite what we might wish, it is usually a quiet, repeated correction, something like catching yourself mid-thought, in the exact instant the old reaction begins to rise, and saying inwardly, that quality is not only theirs, it is also something I carry, and I have simply not yet made peace with it. This sounds almost too plain to matter, and yet the effect, practiced over months rather than once, is considerable. Because think for a moment about how much energy a projection actually consumes. The rehearsed arguments in the shower, the imagined confrontations on the drive home, the private cataloging of another person's every flaw, the replaying of a single sentence they said, until it has been turned over 100 times. This is not a small expenditure. It is a great deal of psychic energy, spent in a kind of closed loop that produces nothing, changes nothing, and simply burns. When the projection is withdrawn, even partially, even imperfectly, that energy does not disappear. It returns to you, and this is worth imagining concretely. Picture a woman who has spent 2 years quietly resenting a close friend for being, in her own private words, too needy, always asking for reassurance, always wanting more contact than felt comfortable, always calling at the wrong hour wanting to talk about her feelings. This woman has told herself a clean story. My friend is exhausting. My friend takes more than she gives. And the story feels true because the irritation is so consistent. But one evening, in an unguarded moment, something shifts. She notices, almost by accident, that she herself has a need for reassurance every bit as large as her friend's, one she has never once let herself admit, because somewhere along the way she learned that needing things from people was dangerous, or embarrassing, or simply not allowed, and so she built an entire personality around needing nothing, around being the strong one, the low-maintenance one, the one who never calls at the wrong hour. And what she sees, in that unguarded moment, is that her friend has simply been doing openly what she herself has been doing in secret, asking to be reassured, wanting to matter, wanting contact. The moment she sees this, the resentment does not vanish instantly. Jung never promised instant transformations, but it loosens. It becomes porous, because she is no longer fighting her friend. She is finally, for the first time in 2 years, in a position to have an honest conversation with her own buried need, which is where the conversation belonged from the very beginning, and this is the quiet reward that withdrawal offers. It does not simply improve your opinion of the other person, though it often does that too. It returns to you a portion of yourself that had been living, unclaimed and unattended, in someone else's account, held there like money forgotten in an old bank, drawing no interest, doing you no good, and every time you withdraw a projection, however small you are, in a very real sense, coming into a small inheritance that was yours all along. The eighth key is a correction, because this territory attracts more folklore than almost any other part of Jung's work, and I want you to leave tonight able to tell the genuine coin from the counterfeit. You may have heard the line, that we hate in others what we cannot accept in ourselves, and it circulates widely under Jung's name, printed on posters, read aloud in videos, quoted as though it were scripture. But this particular wording belongs to Hermann Hesse, not to Jung. Hesse wrote it in his novel Demian, and it is a fine sentence, a memorable one, but it is not Jung's sentence, and it matters to keep the record straight, not out of pedantry, but because the blurred version does real damage. It flattens a subtle psychological instrument into a blunt accusation, one you can swing at yourself or at anyone else, in any argument, at any time, and once a tool becomes a blunt instrument, it stops being useful for the delicate work it was built for. Jung never claimed that everything we dislike in another person is always a hidden self-portrait. Some people are simply, by ordinary observation, difficult or dishonest or unkind, and calling every dislike a projection would be its own kind of evasion, a way of endlessly examining yourself instead of setting a reasonable boundary with someone who has genuinely wronged you. Imagine a man whose business partner has quietly falsified figures on a shared account, and when confronted, the man softens the confrontation by telling himself, "Perhaps this anger I feel is really about my own shadow. Perhaps I am simply seeing my own dishonesty reflected back at me." Here the Jungian language, borrowed carelessly, has become a hiding place, a way of avoiding a plain and necessary reckoning with a partner who did something wrong. That is not what Jung intended, and it is worth saying plainly, sometimes a theft is simply a theft, and the correct response is not deeper self-examination, it is a clear boundary, calmly and firmly set. The test, as we said earlier, is disproportion. Not every irritation is a summons from the unconscious. Most small frictions of daily life are exactly what they appear to be. Minor mismatches of temperament or timing. A neighbor who plays music too loudly is not a mirror. He is simply a neighbor who plays music too loudly. It is the reactions that are too large for their occasion, too persistent, too strange in their intensity. Reactions that outlive the event that caused them by days or weeks, that deserve the deeper question. Learn to tell these apart, and you protect yourself from two errors at once. On one side, the error of never examining your reactions at all, treating every strong feeling as simply correct because it is felt strongly, and on the other side, the equally common error of examining everything so relentlessly that you excuse real harm done to you in the name of self-work, turning every legitimate grievance into an occasion for private confession. Jung wanted neither of these postures. He wanted discernment, a steady eye that can say, "This much belongs to me, and this much belongs to what actually happened." And that steady eye is not built in a single evening. It is built slowly, by asking, each time a strong reaction arrives, is there a reasonable, proportionate explanation sitting right in front of me? Or is the size of what I feel too large for the size of what occurred? If the explanation fits the event, honor it, set the boundary, name the harm, walk away if you must. But if the feeling dwarfs the occasion, if you are still turning it over at midnight 3 days later, then, and only then, does the deeper question belong here. What in me has this touched that is far older than this particular person or this particular afternoon? The ninth key is the widest view, and it is where all the others gather, because if you follow this thread far enough, across a whole lifetime rather than a single week, you begin to see something Jung considered close to the center of what he called individuation, the long, unglamorous work of becoming who you actually are, rather than who you were told to be. Imagine your whole life laid out as a road, and along that road, at intervals you never chose and could not have predicted, particular people appear: the teacher who humiliated you, the friend who abandoned you, the lover who adored you past all reason, the rival who made your blood boil for no reason you could ever fully explain, the stranger whose stillness unsettled an entire civilization's worth of restlessness in one afternoon. Taken singly, each of these encounters looks like ordinary life, chance meetings, the accidents of circumstance. But taken together, across years, a pattern starts to surface. The same few qualities keep returning, wearing different faces, decade after decade: admiration for the same kind of confidence, discomfort with the same kind of neediness, fury at the same kind of carelessness. And Jung would say this repetition is not bad luck. It is the unconscious, patiently, insistently, showing you the same unfinished material again and again, until you finally sit down and do the work of recognizing it. This is what the title of tonight's teaching is really pointing toward. Not that people are sent to you by some outside design. Jung was a psychologist, not a fortune teller, but that the psyche itself, seeking wholeness, keeps arranging encounters that will not let certain truths about you stay buried forever. Every person who provokes a disproportionate reaction in you is, in this sense, doing you an accidental service, whether they intend to or not, whether they are kind or unkind, wise or foolish. They are holding up, for a moment, a piece of glass that catches the light of your own unknown face. Most people never turn to look at what the glass is showing. They only feel the sting or the pull, and move on, calling it fate, or bad luck, or a personality clash. And Jung's whole method was an invitation to do something braver, to turn, deliberately, toward the glass, and ask what it is showing. And this is not a project you finish in a week, or even in a year. It is closer to a discipline you carry for the rest of your life. Each strong reaction, each disproportionate irritation or fascination, becomes a small appointment with yourself. And if you keep the appointment, again and again, patiently, without punishing yourself for what you find, something does shift over the years. The world does not become less full of difficult or wonderful people, but you become less ambushed by them, less at their mercy, because you have slowly withdrawn enough of your own scattered image from other faces that you can finally see those faces a little more as they actually are, and see your own face, the unknown one, a little more clearly too, which was, Jung would say, the whole point of the exercise all along. Here is the whole picture, held together. No one crosses your path by accident, in the sense that matters. The hook they offer is real, but the heat of your reaction belongs to you. The world becomes, in Jung's own words, the replica of one's own unknown face. And the tell that you are looking at a projection rather than a plain fact is disproportion, a reaction too large for its occasion. The Pueblo chief showed Jung a whole civilization's restlessness simply by being still. The colleague you cannot stand may be carrying a confidence you buried. The irritation inventory is how you begin finding the pattern in your own life. Withdrawal is how you take the energy back. The line about hating in others what we cannot accept is Hess, not Jung. And Jung himself asked for discernment, not blanket suspicion of every dislike. And across a whole lifetime, the same qualities keep returning in different faces, not as punishment, but as an invitation, repeated patiently, until you are finally ready to receive it. So let us say the three lines once more. Together I see the people in my life as mirrors. I withdraw what I have thrown onto their faces. I make the unconscious conscious. And I will leave you with the question underneath everything we have covered tonight. The next person who unsettles you or fascinates you, past all reasonable proportion, what exactly are they standing there to show you?